The dot found the ceiling first. A red bead of light, thin as a needle, slid across the frescoed angels above the ballroom and dropped down a marble column, and the crowd, 600 strong in silk and black tie, felt the change before they understood it. A glass shattered somewhere near the string quartet. The bead swept low, skimming the floor, hunting. Then a woman moved. She didn't scream. She didn't freeze the way the others froze, half a beat behind their own bodies. She pushed off her heels and drove herself flat against the broad back of the nearest stranger, both palms flat between his shoulder blades, spine to his suit jacket, and his arm came back and clamped around her waist, hard, without his head turning even an inch. The dot slid over the place where she'd been standing a half-second before. Found empty marble, held, moved on, rewind. 90 seconds earlier, the gala had been only a gala. Nora Whitfield was working the champagne floor with a tray she'd carried 300 times that week in her mind and never once in her hand until tonight. Flutes in a tight constellation, bubbles climbing. She wore the caterer's black like everyone else on the floor, the too tight vest, the white cuffs, the name tag that said a name that wasn't hers. If anyone looked twice, the borrowed name stopped protecting her. She moved through the guests, the way water moves through rocks, finding the gaps. She had been counting the exits for 3 weeks. Not tonight. For 3 weeks. There were 9, counting the kitchen pass, the coat check, the terraced doors, the caterers propped for smokers. And she knew which were watched and which were watched badly. And one, suddenly unwatched, since 8 o'clock, which was wrong. Because doors don't stop being watched by accident. She had a favorite, 40 feet to her, left behind the ice sculpture. She was not thinking about any of that. She was thinking about the man near the far wall who had turned his head a fraction too fast when the doors opened and had never quite turned it back, and about the weight in her closed left fist, a small, cold thing she should not have been holding and could not put down. The tray she carried in her right hand, the thing she carried in her left. Behind her, a conversation stopped mid-sentence and didn't start again. She saw the second man before she saw the dot. 2 of them, moving, grey suits. Not the wet black of the party, but a flat, matte grey that swallowed the chandelier light, and they were moving against the grain, upstream, through a crowd that flowed toward the bandstand. People turned their shoulders to let them by, obeying a fear they couldn't name. Nora's stomach dropped through the floor. She let the tray go, and the flutes sang against a side table, and champagne ran across the linen, and she was already moving, already choosing, and the man she chose was the largest still shape in a room full of motion. He was standing alone at the edge of it, broad, unhurried, a glass he wasn't drinking, held loose in one hand, watching the room the way a man watches a fire he built. Behind her the cello faltered, 1 bar of dead air, then caught itself. She got behind him and pressed close and felt, through the fabric, the slow, heavy knock of his heartbeat, unbothered, a metronome. And the dot came looking, and his arm came around her waist. He still hadn't looked at her. "Don't run," Damien Rourke said, quiet, nearly gentle. His eyes never left the 2 grey men. "Running is how they find you." She didn't answer. Her fist was clenched so hard the knuckles had gone the color of the marble, and inside it, biting into her palm, was a small brass cufflink, cool now with the sweat of her hand, engraved with a wolf's head that snarled up out of the metal in worn relief. She held it the way a drowning person holds a splinter of the boat. If they found what was in her fist, she was dead where she stood. It meant nothing to anyone in this room but two people, and one of them didn't know yet that she had it. The dot was gone. The party, delayed, began to understand what had happened. A swell of gasps rolling backward from the column. A woman crying. The quartet lurching into silence. Security fanned out with the useless urgency of men arriving after the moment. The two grey suits did not fan out. Men who don't hurry after a missed shot have a second plan. They kept moving, unhurried now, toward the service corridor at the north end, and Damien watched them go and did not take his arm from her waist, and he filed the shape of them away in the place where he kept the faces that had lied to him. His thumb at her side felt her breathing, fast, too controlled to be panic, too hard to be calm. He noticed the way a man notices a wrong note in a song he knows. He didn't ask who she was. Answers arrive faster when you don't. Then, near the service door, a sound. A small metallic click, precise, mechanical, out of place among the human sounds of the room. Not the shatter of glass, not a heel on stone, a click like a device coming loose. The party noise fell away around it, a pocket of dead quiet. Nora's head turned toward it before her mind caught up, and Damien felt her whole body orient, a compass, finding north, and for the first time he glanced down at the top of her head. "Stay," he said. She didn't stay. She slipped out from under his arm. His hand opened. Let her, a decision he'd examine later, and crossed the 8 feet of floor to the service threshold, where the caterers came and went. Beyond the door, silence. She crouched, and her fingers closed on something at the base of the doorframe. She lifted it into the low light, an earpiece. Flesh-colored, curved for a right ear, still faintly warm. Not dropped by anyone leaving. Dropped by someone standing here a moment ago and listening. She looked up, and there was a caterer in the corridor. Black vest, white cuffs, a tray in his hands with 4 full flutes on it that he had not once tried to serve. Standing very still, watching her hold the thing he'd lost. His name tag said Marcus. His hands were wrong. A server's hands move. His were set on the tray, like a man holding a wheel. He looked at the earpiece. He looked at her face. For one heartbeat, neither of them breathed. And whatever he saw there made him set the tray down, slow, on the credenza, and reach one hand back toward his hip. Behind her, unhurried, Damien Rourke was already crossing the floor. Marcus's hand never reached his hip. Damien's palm closed over his wrist and folded it up behind his back in one economical motion, and the man went down to one knee against the credenza with a grunt, the false calm gone out of him all at once. 2 of Damien's people were there before the flutes stopped ringing, lifting Marcus by the arms, walking him through the service door and out of the light. No fear in Marcus's eyes as they went. That was worse. No one at the party saw. That was the point of people like Damien's people. The earpiece, Damien said. Nora held it up, still faintly warm in her palm, flesh-colored, curved for a right ear. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at her, and for the first time he really looked, the wrong name tag. The caterer's black that fit like it had been borrowed. the steadiness in her that the room did not have. "Come with me," he said. It was not a request. He walked her off the floor with a hand at the small of her back, unhurried, the way a man walks a woman he owns. And the crowd parted for him the way it had refused to part for the grey suits. Security was locking the room down, now doors sealed, a low announcement about a technical fault. 600 guests herded toward champagne they no longer wanted. Somebody had walked a live sightline into his gala, into his house, and that was a thing that did not happen. And it had happened, and Damien Rourke walked and thought, and said nothing. The shooter was still inside. He could feel it. In the quiet of a side corridor, he handed the earpiece to a lean man with reading glasses, pushed up into his hair. "Whose ear?" he said. "Give me the roster." The man was already moving. A lieutenant fell in at Damien's shoulder, eyes flicking to Nora, question all over his face. "She stays with me," Damien said. He didn't slow. "No one touches her." The lieutenant nodded and dropped back, and Nora felt the sentence settle over her like a coat she hadn't asked for and could not take off. The roster came back fast. A tablet turned so Damien could read. The lean man's voice had dropped to a whisper. "Earpiece is service band, not ours. Kitchen rosters got a name onboarded this afternoon. Walked in on a temp voucher. No vetting. Cleared by the coat check desk." He scrolled. "Same's deg logged 3 staff badges tonight that don't match the catering manifest. The coat check clears staff now," Damien said. "Somebody made it clear staff tonight." He let that breathe. He turned the fact over once, slow, the way he did everything. A rigged voucher, a desk that shouldn't have the authority, and had used it exactly 3 times. Overhead, a door shut, soft, and all 3 of them froze, until the silence proved empty. Somebody inside the walls had built a door and propped it, and walked killers through it. "Who runs the coat check tonight?" The lean man checked. "Falls under floor security. That's Holt. Grayson Holt, Damien's own Gala security chief. The man who'd swept this ballroom twice before the first guest arrived. Who signed the manifest, who had stood at Damien's shoulder for 2 years. Damien said nothing. He didn't move, but something went cold and precise behind his eyes, the way a lock goes cold, and Nora, who watched people for reasons she wasn't going to say, saw the exact moment a trusted name became a suspected one. Glass shattered somewhere down the corridor. Not champagne. Sharper. A pain. Damien moved before the sound finished, turning his body so that he was between her and the dark of the corridor, one hand flat and warm against her spine, pressing her back a half step into the alcove. "Behind me," he said, low. His eyes went to the corridor's black mouth and stayed there until the sound resolved into nothing. A dropped serving cart, a caterer swearing, ordinary noise. Only then did his hand ease. It did not leave. "Boss." Grayson Holt came around the corner at a controlled jog, radio in hand, jaw tight with the right amount of worry. Exactly the right amount. Damien filed that too. Big man, capable, gray at the temples. West wings unaccounted for. Cameras went dark on the whole run for 90 seconds during the incident. "I'll sweep it myself. I don't want to send the juniors into a blind hallway." Damien looked at him for a beat longer than the moment needed. "Go," he said. Holt went, alone, fast, into the dark run of the West Wing, and the dark took him without a sound, and Damien watched him the whole way and filed it, and did not say a single word about it to anyone. Nora, close enough to feel the tension come up through his arm, understood only that she had just watched him make a decision he wasn't going to explain. Then his phone lit. It was in his other hand, screen half turned, and the incoming caller ID flashed against the dim corridor. No name, just a number and a small avatar, a crest, worn brass-colored on the black glass. A wolf's head. Snarling up out of the little circle, Nora went still, all the way still, the stillness of an animal that has heard the twig. She knew that head. She knew the exact snarl of it, the notch worn into the ear, because it was engraved on the small cold thing biting into her left palm, and she had held its twin once in a house that no longer existed, and the sight of it here, on his phone, in his hand, meant something she could not yet make her mouth say. Her pulse was suddenly loud in her ears. Damien declined the call without looking. He didn't see her face change, but he felt it, felt her breath stop against his side, and he turned. His gaze dropped to her hand, to the fist she'd carried clenched since the floor, to the sliver of brass showing between her white knuckles, and the shape of the wolf's head worn into it, catching the low corridor light. Damien Rourke stopped breathing. He knew that cufflink. He had said 4 years, knowing it was gone, taken off a body on a warehouse floor, the twin to the one that still sat in a drawer in his study, because a man cannot bury half of a thing. His face didn't move, but something behind it opened, an old wound with the dressing torn off, and for a moment the Syndicate King was just a brother, looking at the last thing his brother wore. "Where?" he said, very quietly. "Did you get that?" Her mouth opened. Something crossed her face, the decision to lie, then the decision not to. Then a third thing, older than both. Fear, worn smooth by 4 years of carrying. "Sir," the lean man was back, tablet up, urgent. "You need to see the coat check log." Now, the moment broke. Damien's eyes stayed on the cufflink 1 second more. Then he closed her fingers back over it, gently, his hand around her fist, and turned to the screen. She spoke before he could read the screen. "Your brother had a caterer once," Nora said. Her voice was low and steady and did not shake, the way her hands never shook. Down the corridor a radio crackled and cut to silence. She didn't stop. "A man who cooked for a house on Aldous Street and kept his mouth shut when your enemies came asking, and paid for it. That was my brother. And the men who killed him took the cufflink off his hand and left its twin behind because they wanted your family to find it. A message. I've been carrying it for 4 years." Damien turned from the screen entirely. "I knew the wolf's head the second that dot came off the ceiling," she went on, "because the last time I saw that crest, it was on the man who shot my brother. So when I saw 2 of them walk in tonight, I didn't guess. I knew, and I hid behind the one man in this room. They would never fire a bullet through you." The corridor was dead quiet. Even the Gala overhead seemed to have stopped. Damien Rourke did not crumble. That was not in him. Something in his face went from cold to something colder and more exact, and she watched him take the whole night. The rigged voucher, the dark cameras, the earpiece, the 2 gray men, the crest on his phone, and reread all of it in the space of 1 breath, every piece sliding into a place it had been built to fit. 4 years, he said, not a question. 4 years. She pressed the small brass thing into his open palm and closed his fingers over it, the way he'd closed hers. This is why they came. This is what your brother died holding. It was never yours to find by accident, Damien. Someone kept it moving, so it would land here, tonight, in your house. His hand closed around it. For one instant, the rage came up in him like a tide. So hot, she felt it through the air, and she didn't step back. She put her hand flat over his fist, over the cufflink, over 4 years of a wound with the dressing torn off, and held it there until the tide went back down and left the cold, usable thing beneath. She did not save him with a gun. She saved him from the version of himself that would have gotten them both killed in the next 30 seconds. Then the lean man turned the tablet, and the screen answered the rest. The coat check clearance codes. 3 staff badges, all signed by the same override. All signed by Grayson Holt. The lean man's hand was suddenly not quite steady. The West Wing, Damien said softly. He didn't go to sweep it. He went to unlock it, the lean man said. Cameras came back up. There's a service door in the west run, propped from the inside. 90 seconds ago, whoever had come through was already inside. Holt had opened the door. Holt had built the door. The man at Damien's shoulder for 2 years had walked the rival crew in, and was, right now, alone in the dark, holding it wide. And the crew was not leaving. Radios crackled down the corridor, not retreating, closing, because the target had changed. Damien's people came back with it, breathless. The grey men were sweeping the ground floor, now, room by room, and they weren't looking for Rourke. They want the cufflink, Nora said. She understood it, before the men did. They want it back, and they want the person carrying it. As long as it exists, it ties them to my brother, to yours. I'm the loose end, not while you're with me. Damien was already moving, one hand closing around her wrist, drawing her toward the service stair. Tunnels. Now. They went down. The Gala roared dimly overhead as they dropped into the concrete arteries. Under the ballroom, pipes, low lights, the smell of cold stone. Twice Damien stopped them dead, hand up, listening, until the dark ahead proved empty. He moved through the tunnels like a man who owned the map, and he did, hitting a junction and turning without pausing, Nora a half step behind. The cufflink now in his fist. Behind them, footsteps. Ahead, a steel gate. It slammed down as they reached it. Motorized, fast, a wall of grey bars dropping from the ceiling and locking into the floor with a sound like a coffin closing. And on the far side of it, through the bars, stood Grayson Holt, hand still on the wall control, jaw set, no worry left in his face at all. You should have stayed upstairs, boss, Holt said. Damien didn't waste breath on him. He turned, put his body between Nora and the tunnel behind them, and drew, smooth, certain, no tremor, as the first grey suit rounded the corner into the low light. The gate was locked. The crew was in the tunnel with them, and the only way out was through. The first shot cracked off the stone above Damien's head, and he answered it before the echo landed. The lead shooter dropped his aim, hit high in the shoulder, spun into the wall. But there were 3 more behind him in the narrow dark, and the gate at Nora's back was solid steel, and Holt had the only control, and there was nowhere left to go. Then Nora ran the wrong way, not toward the gate, toward the wall. She'd spent 3 weeks memorizing these arteries the way she'd memorized the exits, and she knew what the caterers knew, and the killers didn't, that the service tunnel forked 12 feet back into a low recess where the building's old dumbwaiter shaft came down, and beside it, painted red on red so no one saw it, the master gas shut-off for the ballroom kitchens overhead. She hit the valve wheel with both hands and hauled. Somewhere above, the burners died. And down here, the pressurized line she'd cracked at the coupling, the one the caterers cursed every service because it hissed, let go with a shriek of gas into the confined tunnel, filling the crew's end of the dark with a smell that made men flinch and back away from their own muzzle flashes, because any of them who fired now fired into a fuse. Damien, the shaft. She was already wrenching the dumbwaiter door up. He heard her. He always heard her. He took the half-second she'd bought and used it like a blade, crossed the gap, caught the second shooter's wrist as the man hesitated over his trigger, and broke it against the wall, taking the gun as it fell. 2 down. The other 2 backed into the gas-thick dark, coughing, weapons useless, the trap they'd sealed, now sealed around them. And Grayson Holt, on the far side of the bars, reached for the gate control to run. Nora threw the cufflink. It arsed through the low light and skittered to a stop in the middle of the tunnel floor, brass catching the one bare bulb. The wolf's head snarling up at all of them. The grey men froze. They knew it. Of course they knew it. The twin of the thing they'd taken off a body 4 years ago. The one loose end that tied their crew to a murder, lying in the open where their own boss could see how badly they'd failed to keep it buried. For 1 full second, nobody moved. Proof turned into a weapon, holding a room of killers still. That second was all Damien needed. He came through the gas-blind dark like something the dark had made, took the third man down with the butt of the stolen gun, and reached the gate before Holt's hand closed on the control. He caught the traitor's arm through the bars and slammed it against the steel until the man's fingers opened and the gun dropped on Holt's side of the gate, out of both their reach. 2 years, Damien said, very quietly, his face an inch from the bars. You opened my brother's door for them. Then you opened mine. Holt's mouth worked. Nothing came out. Overhead, Damien's people were coming down the stairs at last, the ordinary thunder of men arriving after the moment. And Holt heard them and saw the 2 crew members. Choking in the gas, he couldn't reach through the gate to save, and understood that there was no version of the next minute where he walked out of this building. A free man. He stopped reaching. He put his hands where Damien could see them, and that was the closest thing to surrender a man like Holt would ever manage. The lieutenants took the tunnel in 20 seconds. They took the crew. They took Holt through a side door Nora hadn't even known was there. Then it was quiet, and it was just the 2 of them and the low bulb and the smell of gas thinning as the line was shut off from above, and the small brass cufflink on the floor between them. Damien crossed to it. He picked it up. He held it in his fist a moment. His brothers, at last, both halves of a broken thing under one roof. And then he looked at her, and the cold went out of his eyes, and left something she had no name for. He crossed the last of the distance and put his arm around her waist, the way he had at the top of the world above them, in the light, in front of everyone. This time, no Dot chased her into him. This time, she wasn't hiding. "You're not a loose end," he said, low against her hair, his hand flat and sure at her spine. "You're mine now, and no one touches what's mine." She let herself be held. For the first time by choice, she leaned in. By dawn, the Gala was a crime scene, and Damien's world had rearranged itself around the truth. Grayson Holt did not walk out a free man. He was cuffed in the tunnel he'd tried to lock them in. And by morning, he'd been handed over. Every override code, every signature, every dark camera laid out in a file no lawyer could bury. The lead of the rival crew, hit high and choking in his own gas, was taken alive and delivered to the authorities with the twin murders, 4 years cold, now made suddenly, provably warm. None of them were left in the wind. Damien made certain of that. He always finished what touched his blood. In the grey morning of his study, he set the 2 cufflinks side by side on the desk, his brother's and its twin, together at last. Then he looked at Nora. "You can walk out that door," he said. "No one will stop you. Not my people, not the law, not me. I mean it. You came here to end something, and it's ended. You're free to go." She looked at the door. She'd counted it 3 weeks ago, one of 9. The terrace route, badly watched. She knew exactly how to use it. She set her borrowed coat down over the back of his chair. Instead, "I've been counting exits for weeks," Nora said. "Tonight, I'm not using them." He crossed the room. He picked up the wolf's head cufflink. His brother's, the one she'd carried 4 years, and pressed it into her palm, closing her fingers over it, the way he had in the corridor, the way she had over his rage. "Then this is yours now," he said. "You carried it longest." She almost smiled. Outside, past the study window, the street was waking. Then she stopped smiling. A black car sat across from the gates. No plates. It had been there since before the first guest arrived. She remembered it now, the shape of it in the dark. The engine ticked, warm. There was no driver behind the wheel. Nora's fingers tightened over the brass. Damien followed her gaze and went very still. Suddenly the morning quiet wasn't quiet at all. Some things don't end at dawn. They just change cars. If it were you behind that stranger's back, would you have run or stayed? Tell me below.